Please welcome moderator Alex DeRude and the Survey of Hawaii panel to the stage.
Well, welcome back from lunch, everybody. Shall we begin? Yeah. All right. Well, aloha. Good afternoon. My name is Alex DeRude. I'm the new Energy Commissioner for County of Maui on day 2 here.
Yay!
Thank you. Let me introduce our panelists here. We have sitting on my right, Lorraine Akiba, President CEO of LHA Ventures, recognized thought leader with technical expertise and knowledge in the development of Hawaii's renewable and clean energy policy and regulatory framework. Lorraine served from July 1st, 2012 to June 30, 2018 as a commissioner on the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, and previously came with a background in law, focusing on environmental practice and natural resources law. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Our next panelist is Ron Whitmore. Ron is the Deputy Director of the Department of Research and Development, R&D, for the County of Hawaii. Ron leads R&D's knowledge management, AmeriCorps, energy, sustainability, and climate change programs, and he is also deeply involved in disaster recovery and resilience. Ron came to R&D after 9 years in the County Planning Department, where he led community and comprehensive planning. And some few personal facts about Ron: lives in Hilo with his wife and 2 teenage children. He's a swimmer, soccer player, and armchair political economist. Welcome, Ron. And last but not least, Mr. David Bissell has served as the president and CEO at Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, KIUC, since June 2010. Under Mr. Bissell's leadership, KIUC has been consistently ranked as one of the top utilities for solar integration in the country and has increased its renewable energy source generation from 8% to more than 50%. Mr. Bissell was also among 11 utility industry leaders who were asked to serve on the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority's newly formed Transformation Advisory Council. Welcome, David. All right, so that kind of sets the stage for our panel discussion. We're going to be speaking about different pathways to 100% renewable energy and how our different islands and counties are approaching that. We have case studies here, experience from Kauai, from Hawaii Island, and then Lorraine brings a great statewide and policy perspective to the conversation as well. Some of what we'll be discussing, to not go down too deep in the rabbit holes of deep technical policy discussions or technology discussions, we're framing our conversation more around concepts of equity, how 100% renewable energy, what are the equity components to that, charting that pathway? What are some of the resilience considerations to charting that pathway? So that's kind of the framework that we'll be discussing. I'd like to invite my panelists to provide just some brief opening remarks to set some additional context. Start with David.
I'll start on the fireside, okay. Well, most of you, I think, saw John Cox earlier in the session talking about several of the KIUC projects that are being done. So I'm going to talk more about our structure. We're, of course, a co-op, the only co-op operating in the Hawaiian Island chain. So we have an elected group of directors, 9 directors. Many of them are here today. And a lot of the co-op nature and the came from our strategic plan and our success that was set back in 2008 when our directors set a target of reaching 50% renewable by 2023. At that point, we were 6% renewable, 94% oil-fired. Well, gave it away a little bit, but this year we're hitting 50%, so we've met our target years earlier, and seeing that come into board changed our target to 70% by 2025, I think it is, to stay well ahead of the state, actually 2030, well ahead of the state's target at 2040. So we're progressing, a lot of good projects on Kauai, and It's a good structure, and we're having a lot of fun. They're putting in good renewable projects.
Thanks, David. So we'll get more into what that makeup of your renewable portfolio looks like on Kauai and as we discuss further. Ron?
Thank you, Alex. I know there's a lot of conference participants who may not be from the state, so I thought I'd provide a little bit of big picture context about the island of Hawaii. Geographically, it's nearly the size of the state of Connecticut. All of the rest of the state of Hawaii can fit within the island of Hawaii. And yet, given that vast geographic space, we only have about 200,000 people, so the vast majority of the land on the island is either conservation or agriculture. And we have a very low population density, largely represented in small nodes of population in a ring around the island. We also are a bit unique in that I think we're susceptible to nearly every hazard imaginable, including everyone's favorite hazard to ignore, volcanic eruptions. And we're certainly vulnerable to sea level rise as well. In addition to natural hazard vulnerability, we also have very vulnerable populations. I think we are unfortunately the home for some of the state's most vulnerable communities socioeconomically. We have a slightly lower cost of living in Hawaii Island, but very low wage scales. And more than 50% of our households struggle month to month, day to day to make ends meet, and have very little wealth and therefore financial security. Much of this is a function of the what planners call the H+T dynamic, the sum of the cost of housing and transportation. And though we can find fairly affordable housing in large parts of our island, associated with that usually is large transportation costs because there's significant differences between that affordable housing and the job centers. From a renewable energy perspective, we, again, can do most everything. We've got hydro, wind, solar, geothermal, really seemingly no limit to the opportunities on the island. And prior to the eruption, we were leading the state on the path towards 100% renewable. A little bit about my perspective. Unlike Dave, who runs a utility, or Lorraine, a former commissioner, I'm a public servant. My job working for county government is to do our best to represent the public interest. A lot of folks here I know, I forget what the graph looked like exactly on the first day, represent private entities, whether that's a IOU or a investor or someone with a particular product to sell. But really, our lens we have to take towards this larger picture and this pathway to 100% really has to be driven by the greatest, what's best for the greatest number of people within our county. I'm also associated with a bit of a unique department in the county, research and development. I'm not aware of another county level, local government level department with that mission, which is really on the one hand to provide good analysis to drive program development and policy making, and on the other, collaborate and leverage funding to advance innovation. And it's really with a very balanced, sustainable development frame in mind. We really do try to consider environmental, community, and economic impacts in a balanced way. And it's with that lens that we very much approach the renewable energy and 100% renewable perspective. I'm not a technical or policy wonk. My career is in community development, broadly defined. And most of my career, I found myself in positions where I'm helping communities and policymakers make very difficult decisions considering the trade-offs among different choices, largely boiling down fundamentally to who pays, who benefits, who gains, and who bears the risk. And so it's with that lens that I come to this conversation about 100% renewable and clean energy more generally, energy, transportation, and really what is the future for our island, not just for our ambitious RPS goals, but for the people who ultimately we're trying to serve.
Okay, thank you, Ron. So Lorraine, with a statewide perspective, policy perspective.
Yes. Okay, so let me share with you, most of you know me, and it's great to see some friends and colleagues from the mainland, Commissioner Anthony and I guess President Picker, as well as Commissioner Hochschild are here sharing the regulatory perspective along with our own PUC Commissioners, Chair Griffin and Commissioner Potter. So I think it's really important, the role of the regulatory framework in the 100% renewable energy journey, and I think I was very fortunate to be part of the journey, to play my role as a commissioner. I came on board in 2012 and served until 2018, as Alex said, but I think that was one of the most dynamic times, and for those of you who have been engaged as stakeholders in the active dialogue, it's been a dynamic, continues to be a dynamic process, but it was a very dynamic and exciting time. A lot of very passionate dialogue, a lot of very strong feelings, a lot of concerns about issues and problems, about increasing electric rates, fossil fuel, volatility, and trying to get over the hard humps of really implementing the vision of trying to get to a robust renewable energy future. And at the time when I first came on board, it was 70% RPS standard with the 30% energy efficiency portfolio standard, which bears repeating because we can't even get to 100% without the other tools in the toolkit of energy efficiency and demand response. So I'm glad to see that after our panel, or I don't know if it was yesterday or today, there's a dialogue today on energy efficiency, and I think Commissioner Potter is going to be part of that panel because it's a very important part. But the regulators have a very key role to play in this. I mean, decision makers set the policy, and in our state, we were leading amongst the states with 70% renewable, and in 2015, that became a 100% renewable journey. And it doesn't come without challenges because we have isolated island grids, 6 separate island grids, and each one of them have a different mix, and yet we have to come up with a statewide framework that is flexible enough to allow individual tariffs on the different islands to deal with different situations. And some of KIUC's tariffs are slightly different than what may be in place for HECO and MECO and HELCO. But in that broad framework is the common goal of reaching our vision of a clean, renewable, and sustainable future. And I think in recent times, part of the role of what the Public Utilities Commission has been having to do, and was alluded to in many of the panels yesterday and today, is really to balance some of the social cost benefits, to look at the innovation and to facilitate innovation. And I think I would like to share with you that perspective. And now in my new role, there is life after being a commissioner, not only being involved with participants from the private sector, but also continuing to do public service in my role as part of the steering committee of the City and County's advisory committee to the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I think the dynamic that we're hearing throughout the 2 days is the impact of climate change, the impact of the new normal being extreme weather, the concern about resiliency, the lessons we see learned from places that have had to deal with this, our own actually Kauai with Hurricane Iniki many years ago, but Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Maria, as we see that we must, as an island, communities and as an island state, deal with these impacts and be prepared and talk about clean energy in the context of sustainability and in the context of an integrated energy network. Because it's not just the electric sector. We've got transportation, we have other sectors, communications, telecommunications, water, wastewater, that are tremendously impacted by what we put into place for the electric sector, and also have to deal with some of the same issues that impact the electric utility sector. So I'm looking forward to addressing these issues from the lens of resiliency and sustainability. And really, we have the proud legacy from our Native Hawaiian culture of looking to the past of how sustainable practices were put into place, and to learn from those practices and those consciousness of how we treat our energy ecosystem and the other ecosystem that we are part of. And that really is a different lens that maybe regulators in other states don't necessarily have to look at, but I think here in Hawaii, we are leading in that respect, and I think for us, that's the lessons we can share with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Lorraine. So Lorraine just touched on pretty much every salient point in our panel discussion here.
You said you wanted an intro, Alex.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a great intro. So we've heard in our own panel so far and also in previous discussions at this conference the word resilience or resiliency used quite a bit. And just like when sustainability was the buzzword of the day, the term is used in different contexts. It means different things to different people. So I thought I'd just give you a quick definition. One definition of resilience can be defined as the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change so as to still retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedbacks. So really our capacity to absorb disturbance and reorganize being the key points there. Some of the research in the field of resilience is looking at, well, there are different ways to look at this. One way would be this more conventional approach to resilience, which can be coined as restorative resilience. And with that, we're talking mainly about government and service professionals driven efforts that focus primarily on infrastructural and technological solutions to disaster response and prevention. So that's one way of looking at resilience, right? How do we come up with these technological solutions and services? The other side of the coin, which points more to what Ron was talking about in terms of community development, looks at adaptive resilience. And in that framework, seeking solutions that involve effective public engagement, active learning with the goal of achieving more flexibility, adaptability, and sustainability in approaching disaster response and prevention. So this isn't a disaster framework. So with that, I'd like to ask our panelists here to address one of our first questions here, which is, this is kind of a two-part question. One, the first part is, how does resilience play into guiding which pathway or pathways is taken to reach our 100% clean energy goal? So how does resilience play into that pathway? The second part to that is, what does a resilient energy system look like for your respective island? So maybe I'll jump to David here and ask him to first address how do you see resilience playing into the 100% pathway for Kauai, and what does that look like, resilient energy systems on Kauai?
Thank you. Resiliency, in my mind, for our island is keeping diversity of our generating sources, which we have a great diversity right now. We have a lot of fast response conventional generators that we own in two main locations, one close to Lahui, our primary town, and one on the southwest side. So our conventional generators are split. We've got a diversity of renewable types between distributed generation, hydropower that are spread throughout the island on 7 different generators. We've got utility scale solar in 5 or 6 different areas of the island, and we've got a biomass plant in the center of Lahui. And what we're trying to do is we develop projects, and the other project we're working on is a pump storage hydro project on the far west side. So different areas of the island, we want to get where each section has its own generating source, and we want to set up our grid so we can disconnect sections to draw on that if there's a disturbance or lines down in another area. So we call it kind of a mini grid concept that we're evolving into to be less prone to a major transmission problem or one area of the island getting hit harder from a storm than another. So it's a real mix. One of the earlier speakers talked about solar is great, but the new term solar drought that I've never heard of is when you've got clouds or a storm coming over for an extended period of time. And I particularly feel very comfortable having conventional generators sitting there that we can draw on in the event of a disaster. They're very robust, strong, easy to fire up and use if sections of our solar fields get wiped out in a hurricane or any of our other myriad tsunamis or whatever else we could face. We can draw on other generation and be able to get to other areas fast, and we're really focusing on trying to be able to get Lahui, our main population center, up quickly in the event of a disaster, and then we can work outwards. So a lot of resources in different areas, different technologies is how we're trying to deal with resiliency.
Let me just follow up on one point you brought up. You're talking about kind of segmented microgrids, or as one panelist yesterday talked about macrogrids, right? They're not quite the entire grid, but they're kind of sections. Do you have those set up where they're islandable, where you can cut them off and have them run independent of one another and also be connected when needed?
Yeah, we do to some extent, and we're going to do more. We talked earlier, the military base on the far west side will soon be able to be islanded. Lihue itself, we can island. We have the Tesla plant there, and we have the biomass plant can serve Lihue, and one of our conventional generators, so we can island Lihue. And we've got a limited amount of lines that can be impacted getting from the main power plant to our substation that are above ground. We could get that back up quick, and then most of the critical infrastructures, the county buildings and that, are served underground. So we've been working for years, our distribution group, on hardening the system, but a lot of it's focused on Lihue, where getting the town center up quickly is really a key to our disaster recovery plans.
Great, thank you for that, David. Ron, maybe, so David gave us a kind of that technological infrastructure perspective on resilience or resiliency. Do you want to give it another perspective?
I could just add on that, I totally agree. It's a matter of diversity of generation and geographic location. And I got to take my hat off to folks with Helco. Given the challenges we faced in 2018 with disasters, I don't think we ever lost power at any point, despite the fact that they lost, a quarter of typical generation, firm load, and which was a third of our renewables. Also, Helco's leading the way with moving towards microgridding North Kohala, which historically has been a challenge to keep source with power. And also Nelha, our partners, are also experimenting with a microgrid at that site. And so those are a couple concrete examples on our island of specific efforts at making us more resilient.
How about in terms of the more community engagement component to resilience? Ron, if you could just speak to that a little more, your perspective on that for Hawaii Island.
Well, so if I understand what you're getting at, is resilience is more than just keeping the lights on. It's having communities that can bounce back from shocks at all levels, right? It's certainly ecosystems, but also households, economies. And that's quite frankly the challenge we're facing right now. We took 2 major hits in 2018. We showed a significantly high level of, I think you called it restorative resilience. Our systems were able to come back online relatively quickly. We're even, PGV's on track even to, begin generating power if all goes well by the end of the calendar year, I believe. But it's going to be years otherwise in terms of our ability to restore our communities and our economies. And that's a whole nother conversation. But for us, that's all part of the picture. And we certainly want to consider the energy and transportation and associated issues in that larger context.
Great.
Can I add to that? I think, for both its overall statewide perspective and also from Oahu's, perspective, I think it's been well publicized, and many of the folks in the room here have been participants in the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency's efforts to come up with a resilience action plan for the city and county of Honolulu, and as well the island of Oahu and the city and county of Honolulu also have a climate impact commission, which has issued reports. So in addition to the remediation restoration, and I think that both Dave and Ron have already addressed, I think it's being prepared from a community perspective. And so, working off that last question that you put to us, Alex. It really is about community resilience planning in a very thoughtful way. It's about adaptation, because we do know with climate change there will be more storms, there are more storms, there will be more hurricanes, there is already sea level rise, there are impacts on our coastline, there's drought, there's threat of wildfires on various islands and different pockets. We have less water resources as a result. Many of our traditional older utility plants are in inundation zones, whether from tsunamis or just from sea level rise. So this is the new reality. This is the new normal. We must plan, we must adapt, and we must mitigate. So part of the 100% renewable energy journey is taking into consideration these things. And clean energy will help us to mitigate some of the effects from greenhouse gas emissions, and to help reduce that as we do our part along with other states and other countries to reduce carbon emissions. But then we also have to be able to adapt as well, because even if we were to be successful in turning back that, point at which we're supposed to be at beyond the point of return, the tipping point, which the UN Climate Change Commission said we have to reduce by 45%. Even if we are able to get there, there are still existing impacts that are not reversible. And that adaptation is very important, and clean energy plays a very important role, as does the technology, as does some of the business model changes that we're looking at in all the pending dockets. So how does that all work? I mean, the PBR docket is looking at the metrics so that we're not just concerned about cost of service, we're looking at outcomes so that we can all work together and the utility can focus on implementing the changes that need to be implemented to get to 100%, to use the technology, to use the resources, to use customer resources behind the meter, to use all the rooftop solar that we have, especially on Oahu, maybe as a virtual power plant, to use the new technology so that we can be resilient. When the grid goes down, those smart inverters on the new systems can provide power to houses. We can have community resilience hubs around critical infrastructure like water, wastewater. Hospitals, schools that can serve as triage centers and response centers, and we can learn from lessons of Puerto Rico and other places that did not have that infrastructure in place. So it is a very concentrated effort, but at the foundation of that is really a lot of the things that we're doing using technology, using grid edge technology, using customer-side resources, using utility scale resources, using the new tools of energy storage, all to create a very sustainable, resilient, new energy ecosystem.
Go ahead, Ron, yeah, please.
I'm glad Lorraine brought the PBR docket up. Again, unlike a co-op, which is democratically controlled, we are operating in an IOU system, and so we make the biggest difference through our work advocating on behalf of the people of Hawaii Island with the PUC and their dockets. And it was mentioned earlier in sessions, but there's some significant decisions that are going to be made in the near term that have very impactful repercussions. First with PBR, where we're basically in a position of trying to pick metrics that measure preferred outcomes across, hopefully, a range of goal areas, not just 100%. In my mind, 100% renewable is a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. I think too often in the energy conversations we talk about it as just the end. But we can't reach 100% and sacrifice every other metric or outcome that is important to us as a community. Bringing it back to that resilience conversation. So we're being very active in that docket because it's critical what metrics we set for ourselves to establish, and if we get it wrong, we could very well find ourselves in a situation similar to what we did with the NEM, where everybody who can afford to benefits from the new policy and market structure, and those who can are left behind bearing the load of supporting the grid and the utility. And so unless we know we're not ever going to let the utility fail from a stability perspective, and we're not going to let the investors take the hit. And so at the end of the day, what is going to give in this mix of performance-based metrics that we're going to come up with? And then even more importantly, following that is the IGP, which is a great admirable effort on the utilities part, where in an effort to hit those metrics, really truncating the forecasting and planning exercises to try to keep up with the rapid change in technology and try to stay aligned with the metrics established through the PBR docket. I'm a technocrat kind of by nature, and so I have a lot of faith in a lot of smart people coming up with good solutions, but I also know that there's not yet an example of a 100% successful PBR mechanism, and that there's always unintended consequences. And so I also think about this broader sustainability and resilience question kind of in that context of, how much faith are we really going to leave and have in our regulatory systems where there's no direct accountability between the folks who own and the system and those who ultimately have to bear the costs.
So I'd like to encourage the audience to send any questions. We do want to make some time for that with the last 5 or 7 minutes here. Lorian, I'd like to go back to you to speak to this. So from a policy perspective, and then, of course, Ron and David, please weigh in as well. From a policy perspective, is 100% renewable energy or clean energy the right or the ultimate goal? I'll give you just an example to set some context to this question. For example, is 100% clean energy reality with low levels of resilience, high embodied energy that disproportionately benefits mostly middle to high income residents as opposed to a low income residents? Is that preferable to an 80% clean energy reality that exhibits high levels of resilience, has low embodied carbon, and is highly equitable across income levels within our communities? So how do we, is 100 the right goal?
Yeah, I guess, being a lawyer, I challenge the assumption in that question because it's a loaded question. And I don't necessarily think it's either or, because I think 100% clean energy does mean affordable, accessible energy. And I know that before I left the commission, we had established through the work of the staff and the stakeholders that rolled up their sleeves and had passionate dialogue about the community-based renewable energy tariff, which is primarily a community solar tariff to address the needs of those who don't have rooftop solar, not because of just necessarily an income issue, but there are a lot of low-income and disadvantaged customers that are impacted by that reality, but also multifamily unit dwellers, people that rent. They're middle income, customers, but they're in apartments that will never be able to have the benefit of an individual rooftop solar system. So there are programs and tariffs and policies that were put into place by the legislature, which the PUC implemented, which is the CBRE tariff, which tries to provide more affordable, accessible access to the benefits of clean energy. And quite frankly, solar and wind are cheaper than oil and diesel. And done well in a balanced portfolio of utility scale, solar and storage, like David was talking about, and is true on many of the islands, with a combined, balanced portfolio of distributed energy resources, smartly using customer resources, and those who have invested either through rooftop systems they own or through leasing and through behind-the-meter battery, energy storage, or commercial industrial customers that have also invested on this because of concerns over reliability. We can have a robust and equitable accomplishment and implementation not only of achieving 100% clean energy, but also being much more able to be self-sufficient in our energy because we're isolated when stuff happens. It's not a truck roll away to get relief to our utilities and to our communities to become truly sustainable in terms of the electric sector affects, like we said, transportation, medical areas, food. I mean, we only have 2 weeks of food supply on the island. But this clean energy journey, it could be politically correct load, like we talked about for the last 2 days, electrification of transportation. We reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. We achieve clean energy. It's a cheaper, better way for people, and with more choices for advanced mobility, with walking, biking, and sustainable plan to communities, we can get there. But it's not just one thing. It's coordinating all of that in a thoughtful way with all stakeholders participating. And I think on each island, that process has begun. So I'm not only bullish and positive about it, but I think renewable clean energy can be an affordable solution, and so long as that toolkit and that portfolio is diverse and makes use of that diversity.
So I'll just open this up to the panel. Recognizing what Lorraine said, that we have some policy elements in place that are helping to guide us towards equitable renewable energy and resilient renewable energy. Are all those pieces in place already, or do we still have improvements to make? Just maybe from a utility perspective, if you're putting it out an RFP for renewable energy, are you required to put in elements that speak to resiliency or equity in those RFPs?
No, you're not required to, but going back to what Lorraine said, you do projects that make sense. The utilities aren't doing projects to meet 100%. They're doing ones that make economic sense, environmental sense, community sense, or they don't get approved. They're either going to get ran down in the community from opposition, or the PUC is going to turn them down. The projects have to look good. They've got to be based on a model of doing what's right for your ratepayers or your members, as we have in Kauai. But there's no guarantee. None of us have a perfect vision forward. We don't know what 100% is going to look like. We probably have the best look forward to it on Kauai, but we don't know. And there's a common misperception, I'll call it, that we're well on our way there. That I've heard people say the first 80%'s easy on earlier, and I can tell you it's not. There's not one project that's being done that's easy. And particularly on Oahu with HECO, they're facing an incredible challenge in a dense urban environment to get the renewable penetration that we have on the other islands. I don't see how they do it. In my mind, there's no technology right now that's going to get them there in an economical manner. So we don't want to look past like this is doable easily or any of that, because it's an incredible challenge for the islands. And we tend to, our early success, that really hasn't been that early, it's just a lot of it's been coming together for all the utilities today and in the last few years. It's there, but there's a long way to go, and it's a hard uphill battle.
So Ron, any thoughts as a follow-up to that? Is our statewide push to 100% renewable leaving anyone behind right now?
Well, I would just like to congratulate Dave and his team for not only, I appreciate that the choices you're making make smart business sense, and they clearly make sense for your owners and customers, because you've been able to both accelerate the growth of renewables, at the same time reduce costs to customers. Is that correct?
Yeah, and reducing costs on the Hawaiian Islands, I don't think is a very realistic goal. What our goal is to stabilize costs and keep costs stable in real terms, going against inflation. And I think we can do that. We're getting constant pricing. We control our expenditures, but it's expensive. It always baffles me that people say, well, why is electric rates so high in Hawaii? And yet they don't say, why is a gallon of milk cost $7 to $10? Why is, everything's high, and we're the most isolated place on earth. And electricity is not going to be cheap unless there's some monumental perpetual motion machine that comes in that we get for free. It's going to be expensive, but the other side of it is we don't use a lot of it. We talked at Rhode Island heating bills and gas for heating. We don't have any of that, so we want to manage to keep the overall cost to the businesses and the customers as low as we can, but it's not going to be cheap. I can't envision 5-cent power in Hawaii is a very realistic achievement level, but I think we can keep costs with a downward spiral, flat, and a lot of times that's what both the residential and the business community needs. They need to be able to forecast, they need to plan, budget to a stable rate. We can't be where we were, and we don't talk about this much anymore, the non-environmental side of getting off oil. We were subject to huge swings in rates, and it was just impossible for families and businesses to operate on that. And we're all moving far away from that, so stabilizing the economy as the islands is a huge accomplishment that us and HECO share, and the commission, and the current commissioners, past commissioners, we've all worked together to do it. So,
I want to say something about energy efficiency and the role of the prosumer, the customer, I think, because we haven't really talked about that, and I think that's really important in this journey to 100% renewable. And I mean, I don't want to steal the thunder from the last, the following panels, but energy efficiency and demand response are really important, and we shouldn't underplay that, because it's not just about the energy. It's about how we use that energy. It's about how we enable and empower customers to manage their usage of energy, time of use rates, to be able to shift load to times when there is cheaper energy so it's more affordable, to be able to bring more renewables on because we do that, whether through electrification of transportation or through other smart appliances, smart home, things that we can have customers help with. And then demand response aggregation. We've all, we talk about the virtual power plant. We talk about all the technology that's now available with energy storage prices going down and individual customers investing in that, as well as commercial buildings investing in that, smart buildings. So we reduce load, we manage load, and we try to use our finite resources more effectively and efficiently, and we work together in that, and we have to plan, and therefore we have new tools that weren't there even 10 years ago. We talk about advanced inverters, we talk about platform systems, we talk about open platforms and data, big data analytics, things that enable us to be able to do things we could never do before. It's not perfect, but there are tools now in the toolkit if we hone them, and we keep an eye as to where we want to go, and I think it is a balance, as David pointed out. It's not going to ever really be super cheap, but we can keep things affordable and accessible and address the other sectors, to help make it so that energy costs are not the drain on the economy, and we can use the positive outcomes, whether that's job creation or other things that can come from a clean energy economy, to help our state continue to move forward. So that's the big picture.
Yeah, let's, one more comment from Ron, and then I want to switch gears for the last few minutes here, but go ahead.
Just really quickly to answer your question about whether I think 100% is achievable. I know technologically it is, but I'll say the politically incorrect thing to say at this conference is I don't think we should pursue it at all costs. I don't think we should go for 100% and sacrifice every other community goal. I'd be perfectly happy with 80% and lifting 100% of families out of poverty. That to me is a really important goal that we should be pursuing.
Okay, so just switching gears here in the last couple of minutes. I have some unofficial numbers here for RPS, where we're at on various islands. So 2018, Miko on Maui was about at 37.72%, Kauai about 44.4%, Oahu at 22.17%, and who am I missing here? Helco, about 43.6% in 2018, okay? 2017, Helco was at 56.57%, right? So more than about a 13% drop from 2017 to 2018 with the loss of Puna geothermal. So my question related to that is, the path to 100% is not necessarily a straight line, right? We can have some setbacks along the way. So what are some potential risks that you could see leading to setbacks on various islands, and how do we best mitigate those risks? And once we do reach 100, we may not always be at 100, right? We may come back to, oh wait, now we're at 95 again. So just if you could speak to that concept.
I'll give three quick ones. Capital markets, interest rates go up, capital becomes harder to get, could slow down development opportunities, economic decline, natural disasters, a hurricane, lava, as we've seen on the Big Island, can set us back. And one that nobody talks about is load growth. And 100% is not a static number that you get. If you have 1%, you gotta cover that every year to stay at 100%. And the big potential load growth out there that nobody knows what's going to happen is EVs. They could, depending on the rollout of EVs, we could have significant load growth on the islands, and we got to catch up and stay there. So load growth makes it much harder. You got to develop more projects every year just to stay constant at 100% if you ever do get there.
Moving target. Yeah.
And I think it's always, the uncontrollable unknowns. I mean, we can't control the natural disasters. We can't control the geopolitical events that may affect our economy and affect things like load and other things. And we can't predict those. So that's why we have to be prepared as best we can to balance, and I keep using that word balance, being flexible with being able to change and innovate, involving all stakeholders, including the customer. Our customers are very active and empowered and knowledgeable and are very committed to making Hawaii a livable and continuing to protect the environment and the communities we care so much about. So it's all important that everybody work together, and that we keep our eye on. It's kind of like the Hokulea, right? We keep our eye on the North Star. We hope to get to where we want to go. There might be obstacles and barriers, and there might diversions on the way. But if we keep focused on where we want to go, that's half of the challenge. And I think that's important to do, and never forget that.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time here. It's been a great conversation. We could keep going for a while, I think. I guess just some closing statement would be 100% renewable. We're going to keep striving towards that as a state, as individual islands and counties, but not at all costs. And we'll try to prepare ourselves, be as resilient as possible for what's to come, for the unknown unknowns, or the known unknowns. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.